Francesco, thank you very much for talking to
You're
Bloomberg
welcome.
Television. So you've been talking a lot, or you're going to be talking here a lot about the move towards renewables. I want to ask, how fixed are your capital expenditure plans on oil, on coal, on natural gas? Could you move away from those investments even faster than you'd previously expected?
We actually have done that. We stopped investing in basic large installations. They're not necessarily only oil and coal. For example, we cut off also the very large hydropower plants that take years and years to complete. And that we've done starting 2014. So as we speak today, we have basically half roughly of our investment for growth, which is something in the range of 12 billions in 3 years, in grids, so the growth of transmission and distribution grids, and the other half in renewables.
And in those legacy assets, if you like, coal, oil, natural gas, could you sell assets even quicker to move away from them?
We have a process of sales that has started and is still underway. We are not particularly keen in selling just because they are out of fashion. I think there is a lot of value in these assets, provided they are managed well. What we are in the process of doing is phasing them out and substituting them with renewable energy sources.
When you look at fossil fuels and the way they're valued by the markets, companies that operate fossil fuels, are they overvalued or undervalued by the markets at the moment?
I think the market is always right. So you can't say that, I'm one of those that are completely agnostic about this value, undervalue, overvalue. The market is paying the right price. I think that these plants have a lot of hidden value, but they need to be managed in a portfolio. They cannot be managed individually.
I wanted to ask you about the price of coal. We've seen the Chinese supporting the price of coal in their region. Are you concerned that European coal and power prices could be affected, could come back down if you see the Chinese stop supporting coal prices?
Yes, they would, probably. Yes, and I would say certainly coal prices would go down if Chinese stop keeping them up.
To what extent do you fear that that's likely?
I think it's likely in the next couple of years, not right away.
And do you plan for a lower coal price then?
We have a position on coal that is going forward 2 years. So we hedge 2 years forward, and the market doesn't take more than that. And I think as far as we can, we have hedged.
In terms of your Italian markets and looking at some of the threats to the business there, are you concerned that regulators might want to push more competition into what you're doing in Italy?
I think there is already about 300 different players on retail, and that's a big competitive landscape. And the regulator today is very busy in trying to do what? To remove the last regulated portion of the tariff of the system. So they have all the intention and incentive to have a healthy free market and a very competitive one, and they have one. In fact, other players are coming into Italy because it seems kind of a very open field. So I don't see that at all. I see indeed the regulator trying to remove the last regulated portion of the market rather than the other way around, re-regulate it back.
One thing that the competition regulators are doing in Italy is looking at alleged anti-competitive practices in Italy. Do you have any concerns about where those investigations might go?
We don't have any of that in the moment. We have some regulators, in particular the antitrust regulator, looking into, rather than anti-competitive, let's say, practices that have to do with infringement of privacy.
Right, around client data.
Yeah, client data. I mean, that's much more important, and I would say much more difficult to handle and much more important for companies like us that have millions and millions of customers. So that's our main preoccupation. The management of customer data.
Are you talking to those regulators?
Yes, of course.
Involved in that investigation?
Yeah.
And just finally, I spoke to one European commissioner who was telling me that the EU is forging ever closer ties with China as America steps away from the Paris Accord, forging ties with China on climate change.
Yeah.
Is that something that translates from that macro level down to the micro level? Are you building closer relationships eastwards, not westwards?
If you remember, the relationships with China were first forged by the US when Mr. Obama and Xi Jinping had this deal about the Paris Agreement, just prior to the Paris Agreement, and Europe was surprised about it. So I think Europe today has a chance to kind of catch up a bit with China, and I think it's fair that this is done. I think China is very vocal and very determined in pushing for a fight against greenhouse gases and climate change.
So do you
We think it makes sense, and I think it should be pursued.
You think the Chinese are leading the climate change debate, the dialogue?
I think they're basically getting into all the void spaces that are left around. So I think they're doing the proper thing. And by the way, I believe they have a lot of reasons for doing that. If you travel to Chinese cities and even into the mainland, you see the need for readdressing climate from the Chinese standpoint. So they do the right stuff.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.